There are already some emerging themes from this morning's conversations, particularly around systems thinking, and I really was eager to facilitate and be part of this conversation, not because I have subject matter expertise, but I think it's a really interesting way to kind of take this giant framing around how interconnected everything is and really zoom in and think about just three sectors. So this idea of energy and food and water and how they interconnect and how complex that relationship is. So I have really thought about some experts to bring to the stage and really prove a hypothesis that I have. And I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to let you guys kind of take the reins and talk about some of the details. So first, here's my hypothesis. First, we talk about how water, energy, and food are inextricably linked. And water is, of course, an input for producing agricultural goods in the fields and along the entire agro-food supply chain. Okay, so we also know that energy is required to produce and distribute water and move that water around. We need to pump it from groundwater or move around the surface water. We need energy to power our tractors and irrigate machinery and to process and transport agricultural goods. So it's my opinion that the global community is well aware of food, energy, and water challenges, but has so far addressed them in isolation. At the national level, fragmented policies, responsibilities, lack of coordination, and inconsistencies between laws and regulatory frameworks can sometimes lead to misaligned incentives. So if water, energy, and food security are to be simultaneously achieved, decision makers, including those responsible for only that one single sector, really need to consider the broader influences and what I like to call the cross-sectoral impacts. So this comprehensive approach to management through enhanced dialogue, collaboration, as you just heard the chairman talk about, and coordination seem necessary to ensure that co-benefits and trade-offs are considered and that appropriate safeguards are put in place. So these four experts to my left are hopefully going to prove that hypothesis or talk about why they think maybe that's not the right approach and to really start to frame this conversation. And I just want to say, I think the last panel on sustainability was really interesting because it didn't indicate that there is a silver bullet or one approach to resilience. We don't wake up one day and say, oh, we're resilient today. Or we don't wake up and say we're sustainable today. It's this continual motion, this continual striving to do better and be more comprehensive. So in order of their presentations, and I should also say that I know that we stand between you and lunch, and a wise man once said, the mind can only absorb what the rear can tolerate. We are going to move pretty quickly. Do think about your questions as you go, and I want you to go ahead. I think there's a link, or there'll be a link shortly, to put your questions in. We'll try to get to them as soon as we get to the Q&A portion. So in order of the folks we're going to hear from, first, Jeffrey Pearson is the Deputy Director of Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources, Commission on Water Resource Management. That's a big business card. Second, from Rick Volner, General Manager of Hawaiian Commercial Insurance Company. I think he's got some great slides. We're really excited. Kyle Data, General Partner from the Ulupono Initiative. And finally, the very punctual and very soft-spoken Paul Brubaker, Principal and Economist from TZ Economics. So I will introduce Jeff, and if I would encourage you to look in your program for a more thorough description and bio of each of our speakers. So they're all fantastic. Jeff, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Jonathan. I've never said I'm a good golfer, and I'm also not an expert, but I'll do my best to give you a little background on how the water gets to the fields that Rick is going to be talking about, where he grows the food, where you're going to change that to the energy side. So I think my goal or my position here is a little minuscule compared to the topic of the session here, but I'll do my best to give you a little history. So as Jonathan said, I am the Deputy Director and I work with the Commission on Water Resource Management. That's under the Department of Land and Natural Resources. That's under the state of Hawaii. We're a regulatory agency. We have a staff of about 21 people. We monitor groundwater, surface water, and all the permits that are required for people to pull surface water or groundwater diversions of streams and so forth. If there's complaints or petitions that come forth by any concerned citizens that usually are represented by, for instance, Earth Justice or National NHLC, the legal corp, they provide the petitions to the commission, and then we follow up and try to resolve these issues. This is never a short, easy process. The one I'm going to talk to you about now is the water that comes from East Maui to feed the fields for the HCNS lands. But before I do that, besides the staff, we have a water commission that meets monthly, and that's who makes the decisions on a lot of these important issues. Water commission resides with 2 ex officios, the head of the Department of Health, the head of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, which is my boss, and then 5 at-large individuals as required by the Water Code 174C. One of those individuals has to have expertise in Hawaiian traditional and cultural practices with respect to water use. One of the commissioners that just got off the commission is here today, Jonathan Starr. I saw him earlier, so good morning, Jonathan. So again, we administer the Water Code. It was established actually 30 years ago this year. So it's 174C, and that really much defines the work that we do at the Water Commission. Okay, moving on to East Maui. East Maui, maybe I should have brought a slide to show you all the ditches, but I think there's like 70 or 80 some miles. Rick can fill in the details if it's necessary, but about 70 or 80 miles of ditch system from near the Hana side of the island, and they bring it back towards the central isthmus of Maui. This ditch system is designed where it diverts streams and puts the water into the ditches and brings these ditches to, until very recently, to feed the thirsty sugar crops that HCNS managed. I couldn't tell you the amount of diversions, but there's a huge number of diversions. And because the concerned citizens clearly stated that these diversions were robbing the residents downstream of water for traditional and customary rights, but also it took away some of the primary uses that the Water Code and the Public Trust Doctrine provides for the streams. There's a list of 8 of them or so in the Water Code. I don't have them all memorized, but fish and wildlife, outdoor activities, aesthetics, navigation, hydropower, maintain water quality, and there's a couple others, but the idea is that if you divert the entire stream, of course, the public trust is inhibited, and some of these issues I listed are not being able to take place. So in some eyes, and the diversions have been going on for over 100 years, so in many eyes, this guy, or not, of course not Rick, but his company back when they worked on getting the water to the central Maui, they were the bad guys. And it's, Rick's heard this 1,000 times, and of course I love the guy, but that's how the politics and the reality was back for over 100 years. Things are changing. With this contested case that came through, that began in 2001 to request or require the Water Commission to restore the streams with flows and establish a new interim in-stream flow standard, which describes the amount of water that has to flow in the stream to meet these criteria I just listed off. That contested case again began in 2001. It's 2017, and it's not completed yet. I'm not going to go into all the details. It would take years. Jonathan could probably do a better job than I could of describing the contested case. But it's gone to a hearing officer. When they shut down their plantation, of course, they needed less water, so we were just ready to bring the contested case out to have it review and have the parties look at it and provide their comments. And HCNS shut down. It was like the same week. It was amazing. So the hearings officer decided to reopen the contested case with this new information, of course, that there's going to be less water use. So that contested case, the reopened contested case, should be ready for the parties to review. I think it's going to be in June. So that's going to be a huge moment. Of course, that's not the end of it. It likely will go to Supreme Court after the review of the contested case. But anyway, that's the important part. Of course, what's going to happen is there's going to be more water in the streams. There's going to be less water to feed HCNS and their properties. But the hope is that most likely is there's going to be enough water for both cases. We're going to be able to meet this criteria of these streams. The interim and stream flow standards will be such that water can go in the streams and there'll still be enough water available for the agricultural needs that we're going to talk about down the line here. So, once the water gets there, I think that I'm kind of out of the picture, and then you guys will talk more about your issues with ags and energy. Another small item that's tied to this is there was leases, revocable permits that have been going on for many years, and that's a point of controversy. And what's been taking place is the courts ruled that these revocable permits were invalid. Last year in the legislature, Act 126 gave 3 extra years for the HCNS or for any other group that has revocable permit to move that. Revocable permit is a 1-year permit that they have to go back every year and get it renewed. The idea is that's through the land division at Department of Land and Natural Resources, not our division. But the idea is that with that Act 126, the purpose is to take these revocable permits, within 3 years, move these permits. There's about 13 or 14 water revocable permits in the state of Hawaii. Remove these revocable permits to a long-term lease. Part of that is an environmental impact statement, which they're working on now. I can't tell you about all the other permits that are out there. So HCNS, A&B is working towards the end to get a more reliable, I would guess you would say, water for their needs in the future. And again, of course, it's sure everyone agrees that their needs will be less. So I guess I'll end this by saying it's a very controversial issue, getting the East Maui water to the Central Maui for HCNS's use, but very likely they'll have enough water to do what needs to be due for the discussion that's going forward.
Thanks, Jeff. So just as we transition, I thought you didn't have much to say today.
That's it.
As we get into some of the questions, I think I want to tease out a little bit more in terms of some of the substance that you were talking about, so I'll be anxious for that. Okay, Rick.
Thank you, Jeff. I think we were supposed to be sitting here in kind of ascending order from the time that we were going to present, and obviously working our way up to Mr. Brubaker there, but Jeff kind of went out of order. So I wanted to just give a brief presentation and a few slides just to give some context to the discussion that we're going to have here in the next half an hour. On January 6, 2016, Hawaiian Commercial and Sugar Company made the announcement that basically changed the landscape of agriculture in Hawaii with the announcement that sugar operations would cease at the end of 2016. And that really, basically hearkened the end or signaled the end to large-scale plantation agriculture that, Hawaii had really been known for, around the world. And so that was obviously a major change, presented a number of challenges, but like most challenges come a number of opportunities as well. First, I'd like to give credit where credit is due. These graphs are actually from data derived from Jeff Melrose's statewide agricultural land use baseline study from 2015. This is what I call my good news, bad news slide. The graph on the left is good news. It shows the diversification of agricultural production in Hawaii and how that landscape has been changing and steadily increasing, since plantation agriculture was introduced in the late 1800s. Unfortunately, the bad news, or the flip side to that story, is overall statewide agricultural land utilization is decreasing. And it doesn't, you can see that every day when you drive around Honolulu, Hawaii Island, whether it's development, urbanization, or just agricultural land that unfortunately has sat fallow for so long, it's very difficult to put back and reutilize that land. At HCNS, we feel we have a significant opportunity to alter that landscape. Our lands are uniquely positioned to succeed in diversified agriculture. We have a commitment as a company to the community and to agriculture in general. It's very difficult, almost impossible, to find the type of contiguous lands that we have access to here in the Central Valley of Maui. We have existing water infrastructure. We're close to cargo ports, whether it's by sea or by air. And we have access to a very strong labor base, a labor base that previously worked these fields and is basically sitting idle at this point. But again, with all opportunities come challenges, and there are significant challenges to increasing agricultural production in Hawaii, which I think we'll probably dive into here in the next 30 minutes or so. But again, we remain committed to diversified agriculture, and diversified agriculture will result in really furthering the state's goals in getting to a food and fuel self-sufficiency or energy self-sufficiency. And we think HCNS and these Central Valley agricultural lands will play a significant role in that.
Well, aloha and good morning. We want to thank the organizers for putting this on the agenda, this issue of energy, water, and agriculture. And we can't understate the importance of that because we recognize that while we are largely, after 10, maybe even 15 years of effort, really starting to solve the issue in electrical energy of how are we going to achieve our goals of 100% renewables, we are just beginning the hard conversation around water about how do we put together our competing goals of energy, water, and food. And we think at Ulupono, as many as you know, we focus as system investors on the energy system, the food system, and the waste system. We think this is so important that we're adding water as our fourth vertical. So let me go back a slide here if I can. So let me tell you about why we think this is so important. Water is a system that both unites and divides us. Energy, agriculture, development, our cultural heritage, the resource itself, are all combined, linked in a series of both hydrological, economic, and infrastructure systems. We know from the work that University of Hawaii has done that climate change will in fact reduce how much rainfall we capture. We're already seeing the secular trend of reduced rainfall and how that's starting to affect our lands. And there's some great work at UH in the Water Atlas that I highly commend to all of you, as well as some work from CTAR that looks at the question of how will the rainfall patterns change on the windward and leeward sides. But we have to start to come to grips with a real shift, that we may have reached the age of peak water, and this is as profound as the shift we started to think about with oil, and especially true for an island state that doesn't have an ability to get resources without using a lot of energy. So we have to ask the question to ourselves, do we have enough land and water to achieve our goals in renewable energy, local food in a sustainable manner? And so we did work back in 2014 on East Maui because it is such a nexus of these issues to try to understand some of the choices and implications. So one of the things that's important to understand about water is that agriculture predominantly uses surface water, and that's true around the world. And when we are cultivating sugarcane, no surprise, agriculture used the majority of the surface water on Maui. The thing that you may not realize, though, is when you think about the pumping of water, both groundwater and the movement of water across the system in our urban water supplies, the heating of water for our hot water, that actually the water system uses a lot of the energy system, about 25% if you can convert the heat into electricity of the water on Maui. Now, one of the issues as you start to look at how are we using water then is when we did large-scale irrigation, you both pulled surface water down, irrigated the plants, it would also recharge the aquifers. So in 2014, if you looked at the balance when we used a lot of sugar, it was about a 1 billion gallon deficit. If we had irrigated all the sugar to the fullest amount, it would have been a very large and unsustainable deficit. If you shrunk the plantation down to about 23,000 acres, it would have been probably a net positive recharge. And these are all measured in billions of gallons, as water's in agriculture is that kind of scale. And we started to realize that the current course that we were on was unsustainable. And so we asked the question of how would we address it differently? So one way to look at this nexus of all these issues is if you sort of think about it as a multidimensional problem, how much of our local food, our energy, and our fuels are we actually providing? And, back in 2014, we're providing very little of the milk and the beef, not a lot of liquid fuels, and a modest amount of fruits and vegetables, and about 26% or so of the electricity from renewables on Maui. The prior business model of sugar, which is really from the last century, along with the rest of agriculture, used a lot of water, about 3.1 million gallons an acre, and got a modest amount of revenue, about $1.20 per 1,000 gallons. So we asked the question of what if we change the cropping patterns? What might be different? And this kind of gives you a sense of what's possible. You could, if you change the cropping patterns, have all the milk you needed, a fair portion of the beef, the majority of your vegetables, good portion of liquid fuels. This used cassava. We also tested sorghum. We left renewable energy as the residues. Obviously, from the PSIPs, we know renewable energy can actually expand out to 100%. And it would use less water in total, about 3 billion gallons left, creating an ample surplus that starts to address some of the conflicts around the water use issues and returning to the streams. So 40% less water, 3 times the revenue per gallon, a lot of greater prosperity. So how do we get to a place like this? And a lot of what Rick was starting to lay out in terms of the diversification that H&S plans begins to move in that direction. So we have to ask ourselves a series of questions as we start to go down this journey. First, what's the cost benefit of reinvesting in the watersheds? We know we're going to have less supply. We know we have invasives. We know we need to regenerate some of the forests. What's the cost benefit of doing that compared to additional supply or desalination? We have to think of the food sheds as essentially limited by the watersheds in each of the counties and how the rainfall patterns change and what really is practical. We have to ask a lot of questions about which crops make the most sense. If you think about what we've done, this is very, very parallel to energy. We set up an energy system in the last century that worked very well, and then technology shifted, and now we're trying to adapt the energy system. We set up a crop system that actually worked great for a century, and now we have to change what crops we're going to make, and what are we trying to optimize in terms of the food system, economics, exports, jobs, all of these questions. But a lot of the cropping patterns will make the biggest difference in terms of which balance we strike. And then there's the issue of how we work together. This sector is actually highly regulated, but also highly fragmented between federal, state, and county regulatory bodies. And almost any decision requires concurrence among all of these. Much like we did in energy, and what Randy just spoke about, we think is so important about how do we change the conversation, both increase interagency coordination, increase the collaborative discussion between the different elements of this question, energy, food, and agriculture. So I'm going to call on all of you in the audience to help with this conversation because it's almost prescient that we're having this conversation in an energy conference because the journey we've just been on for the last 10 years in energy and how we're getting to where we are now in terms of how we're looking at the rules and regulations, how we're trying to find the right balance, how we're bringing in new technologies to optimize our future is the exact same conversation we're about to enter into water. And believe me, it is equally, if not more important, because at the end of the day, if we go down the wrong path and we have to desalinate to meet our water supplies for urban needs, that's the end, essentially, of most agriculture. So the use of surface water and how to balance that use is critically important, I think, to our resilience and our future. Thank you.
So I'd actually only prepared some slides on a very narrow subject, but it does provide a little bit of context in the historical framework. And what am I pressing here? Not the one that says danger. Just this one. So in terms of linking the food, energy, water nexus, and actually I think it's really agriculture, water energy nexus. Let me just give you an example from recent changes in Hawaii agriculture. It may not be as well understood that the rise and recent decline of the corn seed industry in Hawaii has entirely everything to do with energy prices, because most of the R&D that's done in Hawaii in the maize genome is providing the software basically for seed production nationwide that is primarily moving with the price of petroleum as an alternative energy substitute, liquid fuel, biofuel substitute. And of course that whole issue of biofuels, which we haven't talked about, would also be on the list of things that might crop up, no pun intended, in the future of the HCNS lands that have recently been liberated, not to mention the rest of the former sugar and pineapple lands here on Maui and around the state. And in approaching some work for the seed industry recently, and helping them understand the linkage between energy prices and the drop, you may not know, the seed industry 3 or 4 years ago was a $240 million industry. Today it's about a $140 million industry. So that 40% decline in the size of the industry goes right along with the drop in global commodity prices and crude petroleum prices beginning about 2 years ago, the fall of 2014. And in getting into that, I realized there's something I remember learning way back when I was a graduate student in the Pleistocene era, but think before the energy shock of the 1970s, there are these long cycles in commodity prices, and the one I'm showing here is the one in corn. The blue cycle, which is maybe a plus or minus a couple dollars a bushel in today's dollars, out of the $3.50 a bushel per corn today, which was $7 a couple years ago, is part, you can see it up here in the chart, the long wave that once you extract that, you can see the underlying decline in grain prices over the last, I don't know, what do I have, 60 years or 70 years of data, and again, adjusted for inflation. Very different with energy. Here's petroleum doing the same math. So the long cycle, the super cycle, so to speak, it looks more like an impulse response. We've just gone through one of these impulses. The last one, as I say, is the one when I was a student, sort of showed up in 73, 74, and drove a lot of energy policy making in the late 70s and early 80s. And then we went into that quiet period until about 15 years ago when I started meeting Maria Tomei, I saw her this morning, and Mark Glick, and the energy thing, Ted Peck, and everybody started showing up because it got interesting again. We've just been through one of these, and just a nod to the resilience people, if you look at the transfer, if you take out the super cycle, you can see the real price of petroleum rising over time, and then you can see those shocks that the resilience folks were talking about, the global commodity bubble in the spring of 2008, and then that big drop, that's the Lehman event, that's the collapse of Lehman Brothers. These cycles have been going on since the discovery of petroleum, and so I just want to conclude by making this observation that a lot of where we've arrived today in terms of policy making and thinking about these interrelationships is a product of the most recent super cycle. There have been 6 since Jed Clampett found oil, and in 1865 or whenever it was. And we're probably going into kind of a quiet period where $50 a barrel is what everybody has to deal with, notwithstanding what OPEC thinks it's going to try to do. They also thought that in 1985, you may recall, when the last time we were here. And so I'm concerned that we're sort of committed to a particular policy strategy. We've got these huge changes now going on in agriculture and water that might be held hostage to energy policies that are better matched to $100 a barrel or $200 a barrel oil than $50 a barrel oil. And I'll stop there. Thanks. Oh, aloha.
Good. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so the site is up on the screen, so as you have questions, go ahead and plug them in. I have the microphone, so I get to ask the first question to kind of frame this a little bit. So one of the things that I found really interesting in the conversation earlier, when Gil was talking about uniqueness, I want to monologue just a little bit and say, in terms of what's happening in Hawaii, it's not that dissimilar from what I see going on in my home state in Colorado. We have very unique water laws. We have issues around water quality, water quantity, and how you deal with the pinch points that occur in terms of this drive for more local foods. Kyle, your point about what are the right crops, given that we have certain growing seasons. Some people are arguing climate change is a good thing because it's extending growing seasons, and isn't that fabulous? And thinking then about kind of this piece, I want to ask the question, I'm going to give you a bit of a softball. None of you really laid out what you believe is maybe the vision for how you achieve this synergy or this relationship between energy, food, and water in terms of how we achieve security. So you have a couple hundred people sitting here. If you had the vision of addressing that issue, what are the three most important changes at any level? Meaning, if that's a policy issue that needs to happen at the state level, the federal level, or more the municipal level, or a business practice, what are maybe 2 or 3 of the most important changes or the levers that we can pull to move in that direction? I'm going to start with you. Jeff, you want to buy on this one, or you want to riff a little bit?
Visions on the changes.
If we have this vision for securitization around those 3 sectors, what are the changes that need to happen to get there?
Well, our job is to try to ensure that we do have water security. So I'd like to think that the Water Commission is doing a good job. A simple example is managing groundwater. We have sustainable yields that are set throughout the state. They're established in quite detailed manner. The idea is that if we manage these properly, the vision will continue that there will be available water by not overpumping any of the areas where the sustainable yield has been established. If it gets close to the maximum sustainable yield, we'll designate that area. It'll be a water management area, and instead of being managed by the counties, then the state steps in and manages that area. So I'd like to think we're doing a good job. The Water Commission is doing a good job in managing that vision to provide good quality water for future generations.
Okay, let me just ask a follow-up question before we move on. So I'm the out-of-towner. I can ask these questions and step in it a little bit. So, similar to what we're seeing in the West, where we're seeing big changes in terms of precipitation, it's causing some reallocation discussions. For example, the Colorado River Compact, they're talking about reallocation of that essential water to all the states in the West. Is there some thought in terms of resilience planning and doing some forecasting and some modeling about any type of allocation, or do you think there's going to be any change there?
Well, we're not the big city of a couple people have mentioned before that we're it's an island state. So each island is different. Their rainfall is different. Their amount of water available is different. Streams, Maui has many more streams. Throughout the state, there's 368 streams. So I don't know if it's a allocation issue. It's more of a management issue, again, as I fell on before. So 90% or so of the water within the state of Hawaii is groundwater. So again, I keep dwelling back on groundwater, but that's the key, I think, for the Water Commission. Of course, stream surface water is important, and surface water can contribute to groundwater and vice versa. And I think the key is to manage that groundwater to ensure that we have flows in water in the future.
Great, thanks.
So not all allocation.
Rick, couple ideas you'd like to share?
So as you saw from my presentation, I like to keep it simple and short. But there's also another famous economist. He's from Hawaii Island. He's an agricultural economist, I guess you could say. His name is Richard Ha. He's actually a farmer. And he has a very simple saying, which I think, really says volumes to kind of how we look at agriculture in Hawaii. If a farmer can make money, he will farm. If he can't, he'll find something else to do with the land. And agriculture in Hawaii, like agriculture across the nation, has a number of very challenging situations facing it, including increased scrutiny, regulations, the cost to do business. Here in Hawaii, the cost to do business is already, pretty high. It's already a barrier to a lot of businesses. Agriculture has all those same concerns, same worries, and then you add on top of that the inability to forecast weather correctly, and weather can be one of the biggest challenges that face agricultural operations. So anything we can do to give farmers, anyone that's in the agricultural industry, an opportunity to succeed, they will find ways to grow food. They will find ways to grow fuel, grow renewable energy on these properties.
Thanks. Okay.
Well, the way we look at it, there's three dimensions to this. There's the regulatory dimension, there's the business dimension, and then the consumer dimension. So let me speak to each three. On the regulatory dimension, because of the different agencies and institutions that govern water, there's a much higher premium on interagency cooperation and a greater degree of planning. And you can start to see some of the conflicts even between the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service and our state departments, between state and county. There's a lot of work being done, but it becomes equally more important. We think there's an important role that UH has as an institution through the EKY initiative they have that will help bring, I think, some of the parties together and help streamline some of that activity. At the business level, there is no regulatory force like there is in energy to bring these three sectors together. So it comes down to leadership. It comes down to leadership from the utilities, from the landowners, from the food producers, from the groups that manage the water utilities, to start to look at how do we look at our infrastructures collectively. Because there's a lot of benefit in doing that. These are all infrastructures. And I can assure you that if we let the surface water infrastructure, which is already decaying, go, and we don't reinvest in some of that, you'll have an enormous challenge in agriculture. You won't be able to reproduce those infrastructures. But the same thing is true on the infrastructure between the water pumping system and how that plays well with the grid in terms of energy, the use of pump storage, hydro. There's a number of things in infrastructures, and just looking at the water supplies in the counties and as a utility and how they work with the electric utilities. So the more coordination at the business level, the more synergies we'll find economically. That's going to benefit everybody. And then lastly, there's the consumers. I think as consumers in electricity, we got used to the idea of, hey, you know what, we're going to chip in a little bit of our bill, and everyone sees it on their bill. We don't notice it for efficiency. We're going to chip in a little bit for system planning. And so we're comfortable with these system benefit charges. We're going to have to recognize that we're all going to chip in a little bit as consumers for the watersheds. We're going to chip in for water efficiency. We're going to start chipping into some of these funds as consumers to allow that to happen, but also change our behavior the same way we've been changing our behavior in energy. Because efficiency really does make a difference. And it's efficiency both at the residential level, but also at the agricultural level. Not just more efficient crops, but more efficient production systems make a huge difference in how much food we produce per 1,000 gallons of water. And those are also behavioral changes at the business and consumer level.
So I'm going to approach the same three subjects from a slightly different perspective. So on the consumer part, I really don't spend that much time worrying about consumers. They can go down to Costco and get fresh strawberries every day of the year on Maui. So I'm not really worried about that. But on the production part of the problem, I think there's a huge challenge in that. I mean, dude, if you have to get an environmental impact statement to make a dairy, what up?
Tell me about it.
If you have to get Maui Tomorrow's permission to grow something on land you were already growing something on, so I think we're moving in the wrong direction on that. If it's ag land, it's ag land. I'm sorry you built your agricultural condominium subdivision, whatever, next door. A farmer shouldn't have to get your damn permission to grow something on their land. But then, and seriously, but finally, on the sort of to flip that regulatory argument on its head, I'm actually concerned that we're not approaching resource management and regulation the right way, and it's not the fault of the commission. I think the whole thing was set up the wrong way. So to give you an example, are we really worried about the fact that there's not enough water when we're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? So, right, the way I learned it, there's a backstop technology, which is desal, and that sets the upper bound on what anything should cost, and everything else should happen underneath that, cost-wise. And I don't worry about, if somebody can make money, they'll do it. That goes for just about everything, not just farming. But what I do worry about is that we don't actually see any of that pricing. And the way we've set up water allocation, it's all sort of administrative, and we have a commission, and there's people get appointed, and that's, I'm thinking, like, can we get somebody from Maui High to, like, program an app so we can trade revocable water use permits, right, with a fixed expiration date, and some dude that wants to make a long-term commitment to stewardship because they're going to grow something for the next 30 years can get that permit, can like buy the right to do that. And so that I'd like to see the whole thing both in terms of pricing, resource use, right? You want to grow taro, pay for the water, dude. Don't tell me about customary and traditional whatever. You just retired and moved there. And then you retired and moved to Hana, now you're, okay, what? And finally, we're also not pricing the bads. So I don't know about you guys, but except for this parking lot, which is extraordinary, I actually went out and took a look. Everywhere else in Hawaii, everybody's driving around in big-ass trucks, because they're not paying for carbon emissions. I don't understand that at all. So I'll just throw that one out there.
Well, Bob King's big-ass truck is biodiesel, just for the record.
That's a BAT to you and I. So here's the deal. Obviously, we could sit up here for the next couple of hours and really get into this. I want to try, there are some really good questions coming in from the audience, and if we don't get to your question, I want to make sure that you get these guys either later today during a break or tomorrow. Here's one that I wanted to kind of talk about, and Kyle, you brought it up, and I know it's been a topic before about pumped hydro. Do you think that technology, or at least how it's being applied here in Maui, is it moving in the right direction? And maybe what are some of the issues that we ought to be thinking about and not getting high-centered on some of the politics around that? So it's a question for you, but I'd invite anybody to respond to it.
So this goes back to the integration point I made about integration between businesses, right? So the pumped hydro reservoirs are mostly going to be on large landowners' properties, because that's historically where the reservoirs have been, and some in the border water supplies in the various counties. As Randy stated before we got on, the PUC is trying to move forward to get much better clarity on pricing, what's storage worth, so send the right price signals, what's flexibility worth. Those signals are important, but it's equally important that the utility, as it's starting to think through how it's going to manage variability in the system, really start to work more actively with the landowners, recognizing the prices aren't here yet, but they're coming, so that we can enter into that joint planning process of saying, you know what, if you're going to make these changes at HCNS, you're going to make these changes in Honolulu Board of Water Supply, these are the other things that we can support you with, assuming the PUC goes this way. So we're going to have to look forward a little bit in terms of how we work together, and that's very, very important, so that when we plan the next generation of power infrastructure, what we're doing, we're also able to plan the water infrastructure along with it, so that it ties very tightly together, but that will take proactive business leadership.
And where do you think those conversations need to take place?
I think it's at multiple levels. It's not just at the kind of executive level. I think it has to penetrate down to the engineers and people that are really working the details, because that's where it really works.
It's interesting, during the break, I had a suggestion, and I'm going to pitch this out there to the rest of, to our program committee, to think about moving this conference earlier in the year to align with the legislative session. So any conversation that takes place here might find its way into policy that is enabling on these issues. So just a topic for future discussion. So I'm going to look at the time. We have about 5 minutes left. One of the questions that really fascinates me is really thinking about, again, the idea of the levers and prioritizing these various issues. Going back to my hometown in Boulder, a similar situation's occurring in terms of how do you look at the synergy between these different sectors? So we own a whole bunch of open space, and we lease a lot of that property out to farmers and the ability to generate agriculture and of course cattle and recreation, so it's kind of diversifying and looking at all different uses. As we think forward in the scenario planning, we're having a lot of discussion about, well, if we want to be energy independent and energy secure, maybe we need to do more energy generation on those sites. And of course, then you have a bunch of the ag people coming out saying, no, 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 this is about agriculture. You have the recreationists coming out saying, no, this is preserved for recreation. So on Maui and in Hawaii, how do you balance those issues in terms of food production, whether it be for cattle or for agricultural uses, biofuels, energy production, whether it's solar or wind? How do you think about those things, and what kind of conversation do you start?
Sounds like a Rick question, so I'll start. Fortunately on Maui, we have, again, a tremendous resource. We've got 36,000 acres where, as one of Kyle's slides pointed out, I mean, land, at least initially, shouldn't be the critical path. It shouldn't be the gate. Really, it's going to be other resources. It's going to be other things that are going to be the challenge. As far as the synergies, and we really have an opportunity to define agricultural systems that can support both food and energy production and utilize the benefits from that production on an agricultural system to really complement each other. And whether it's rotational grazing, crop rotations, the different crops. Again, as an agriculturalist or a farmer, you're always looking for ways to fine-tune that system and make it as efficient as possible, whether it's to make more money or whether it's just to lower your inputs, whatever it is. And again, I think we just have a tremendous opportunity here. We've got a blank canvas to help, to really start developing that agricultural system.
Paul, do you agree?
So, I'm not a right-wing capitalist economist, although I play one on TV. And so I'm going to kind of think that a lot of what we're talking about can just be left up to entrepreneurial farmers and investors to make the right decisions. I got to tell you a true story. 20 years ago, my grandmother died, and she lived on a 240-acre ranch up on Left Hand Creek, down right below west of Haystack Mountain. And the county swooped in, People's Republic of Boulder swooped in, and said, okay, we got to buy this land for open space. And I'm on the conference call over here in Honolulu, and I'm like, yo, it's a ranch. It is open space. Oh no, but it's not our open space. So my parents and my aunt and everything, they're like, fine, okay, fine. And they left us this little postage stamp of land, which is still there. We still go hang out there. But the thing is, Boulder County Open Space has not been as good a land manager. I mean, the prairie dogs are all up and everywhere, and so now there's more coyotes, which is fine, and the Canadian thistle. I grew up on this place in the summer, so I know what it takes to, and the rancher that comes down and brings the spring cattle down, or spring whatever, the calves, pretty much the same guy for a long time. But what I realized, it's really about preserving the open space for the .com refugees that built their mini Stanley hotels out in the country. And, I'm pretty sure that we can trust farmers to do a good job if the framework that's set up and be responsible with respect to water use. My own guess is that bioenergy crops are going to dominate in the future, but that's just a guess. By the way, my second pick is biopharmaceuticals, but I'm just saying the fact that I have an idea of how it's going to turn out shouldn't limit what investors are able to take a shot at. And there's a lot we could do to tweak the system to make that more possible. My guess, as I said earlier, I think we're kind of moving in the wrong direction. I'm not convinced that the county and the state owning the land and redeploying it is going to be better than enabling private investors to make those decisions.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Let me just build on what Paul said. The conflict is not between energy, ag, and water. In fact, that's where the synergies are going to be. The conflict's actually between those sort of the food issue and the energy issue and development. That's where you're going to see these urban-rural boundary conflicts, the shift in the demographics and the cultural conflicts, the increasing culture of litigation. Those are the things that are going to slow us down. But in terms of where the conversation can go between energy, agriculture, and water, what you're going to see, I think, is tremendous economic synergies because it's all about byproducts and co-products, right? You know, food needs a lot of heating and cooling. It plays very nicely into the energy system. We think of where waste heat goes and waste electrons go. There's a lot of value in that. There's tremendous flexibility in the movement of water for agriculture and irrigation. There's obviously the elevation changes. And of course, you know, windmills and cows don't conflict at all. In fact, they grossly synergize because just using a different use of the space and the land. So we'll see a lot of opportunities there. I think what HCNS is planning, that map they showed, is a good example of how the future can look and how it can bring a lot of those multiple outcomes together simultaneously, including bioenergy crops where they make sense.
Great. So we are out of time. You guys are terrific. I really appreciate you lending your expertise and your thoughts to this conversation. Obviously, this could go on all day, and I think this is the place I ask the question, where does the conversation start? It started here. Let's continue the conversation, and hopefully by the time we're back here next year, we'll be able to show that we've moved the ball up the field. Thanks.